With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Yud Dalid. We are starting the third and the final chapter of Moed Katan, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, by the Mishnah. Now, first of all, as we mentioned, Perek Shlishi of Moed Katan Ve'elu Megalchen is the source of all of the halachas of Avelus. Interestingly, as we're going to go through the sugya of Avelus, we will notice that there are two practices of Avelus that are not done nowadays. One is called Atifas Horosh. There was a unique way that people would wrap their head and have the garment that they used to wrap their head go over the forehead, over their nose, all the way down to their lips. That's a practice, as we'll speak out, that's not done nowadays. We will also be learning about another practice known as Kefias Hamita, which is the overturning of the bed. And according to many, they used to overturn all of the beds in the home if the home belonged to someone who was in a mourning period. And again, this is another practice that's not done nowadays, and we will explain why. Now, the Perek will not begin with the laws of mourning. The Perek is going to begin, or we're going to continue to speak about the laws of Chol HaMoed, and we'll see soon how we'll link it into Hilchas Avelus. But up until now, we learned a very important rule, which is that if there is an activity that is needed for the festival, for Yom Tov, L'tzoyrech HaMoed, whether it's only for Chol HaMoed, whether it's for the last days, whether it's for both, the rule is that will be permitted. At best, in worst case scenario, like we learned, you cannot do it befaresya. If you're doing something that's L'tzoyrech HaMoed, but you can't readily discern that it is for the festival needs, you got to figure out how to resolve that. But the rule is, anything that's done for Yom Tov is allowed to be done on Chol HaMoed. And really, we will see that there are two big exceptions to that rule. What are the two exceptions? Number one, taking a haircut. If a person wants to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed because they would like to have their hair cut for Yom Tov, for Chol HaMoed, for the last days, they may not do so. And similarly, laundering clothing is also something, even though one is doing it for Yom Tov, L'tzoyrech HaMoed, it may not be done. That's step number one. Step number two, actually the Mishnah begins with step number two, is that we have exceptions to these exceptions. Even though taking a haircut and laundering the clothing may not be done, even though it's L'tzoyrech HaMoed, there are certain scenarios where one is allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. There are certain scenarios where one is allowed to launder the clothing on Chol HaMoed, and we're going to be learning about that. Now, when we're speaking about hair cutting, we're going to go into an oval, that someone who is in a mourning period, such a person may not cut their hair. We'll see that an oval may not cut their hair, including for those people who cut their beards in a halachically permissible way, according to some. They also may not do so for the entirety of 30 days. As we'll get into more details, we're going to learn that there aren't any obligations of mourning on a minor. Ein Avelus B'Katan. On Daf Yud Daled Amud Beis, we're going to begin to touch the topic of Avelus and Yom Tov. Here we're going to learn the rule that Avel Einoi Noiheg Avelusai Beregel, that an Avel does not keep any of the laws of mourning during Yom Tov, not even those laws of mourning that one will keep on Shabbos. And that will be the beginning of a topic that we will actually follow through on Daf Chav Gimel. And we actually paskin like the more lenient opinion on Daf Chav Gimel, that not only does one not practice the laws of mourning on Yom Tov, but the Yom Tov actually cuts the days of mourning. So as we'll learn that the Shiva is 7 days, if Yom Tov falls within the Shiva, it ends the Shiva early, as we'll learn this sugya as we unpackage it. Now, as we'll see how far we can get on Daf Yud Daled, but we will see that the laws of mourning and the laws of someone who was excommunicated by a Beis Din, someone that was put into a nidui, as we'll speak about, and someone who was a Metzora, have a lot of similarities. And these similarities, or perhaps exceptions where they are not similar is going to be basically the topic Yudalad Amid Beis, and the entire Daf Tezvav speaking about every single law of a mourner, and to see whether that law of mourning also applies to someone who's in a ban, whether it also applies to someone who is a mitzayram. And finally, even though we're not beginning with mourning, we're beginning with Chol HaMoed, for the clarity again, someone is in mourning halachically, someone is obligated to mourn halachically if someone lost one of the following 7 close relatives, God forbid, either a father or a mother, brother, sister, son or daughter, spouse. These are the 7 people for whom we must mourn. Mourning itself goes through various stages. There is the day of the passing prior to burial. Then that person, the relative who's alive, is called a oinen. He's in a very severe phase of mourning. And there are unique laws for the person who is a oinen or hilchos aninus. Then you have the burial, which ends the aninus, and now you begin what we call the shiva. And then when the shiva concludes, you have what we call the shloishim, which is counted from the burial and not from the day of the passing. And if a person is mourning for father or mother, then the laws of mourning to a certain degree go for the entire 12 months, but to a lesser degree than to the shloishim. Let's leave it at that. There's many arguments whether Avelus is midoiraisa, whether Avelus is midrabanan, and people that are thinking say, you're kidding? The Torah writes twice about Avelus. One beremes, one clearly, right? When by Parshas Noach, I forgot the exact words. When the Torah speaks about that the Mabul was going to fall in 7 days, so Rashi writes that there was a certain delay of 7 days because people were sitting Shiva for the passing of Misu Shelach. That's Tzaddik, Rashi writes. So we did sit Shiva prior to the Torah being given. The Torah also writes regarding Yaakov Avinu, after all of the mourning that they did in Mitzrayim, right? They embalmed him and then they mourned him. After that, when his children, our grandparents, took Yaakov Avinu to the Holy Land, so at one point the Torah writes befedish that there was an Avel Shivas Yamim. The Torah speaks about 7 days of Avelus, but this is the rule, my friends. Remember the rule that Ein Lemedim Mikoidim Matan Torah, Nitna Torah V'Neschatcha Halacha. The fact that we do a bris milah right now is not because Avraham Avinu did a bris milah. It's because God commanded us in Sinai to make a bris milah on the 8th day. And we know that this began with Avraham Avinu. So there is a link to Avraham Avinu. But just because things were practiced prior to Matan Torah, the rule is that is not the source nor a reason for a Jewish person to fulfill them today. And therefore there are many opinions that hold that Avelus is only midrabanan. But we're going to get to that whole topic as we begin learning the sugya. Doesn't
it talk about Avelus in B'zos HaBracha also?
Where do we have Avelus? That we cried.
When Moshe Rabbeinu.
Correct. We cried for him. Crying for him doesn't necessarily, the Torah does not use the word Avelus. We have Shukis about Koida. What's the word? What's the pasuk? I think Vayivku Olav. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's about crying and not about mourning. It's a big difference that.
Something like that, right?
Okay, let's start on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Let's begin with the Mishnah. Again, this is amazing. It's amazing that we learn 2 Parakim, one of the biggest Taterim. It's not even called a Heter. That's something on Chol HaMoed that you are doing for Yom Tiv, whether it's just for Chol HaMoed or only for the last days or for both, is allowed to be done. Maybe again, not Befaresya, sometimes. Spices, yeah, fruits not. But hair cutting, laundering, as a rule, may not be done on Chol HaMoed. Now, why? We'll see in the Gemara. So that's the exception. The Mishnah begins with the exception for the exception. There are times that it will be permitted. The following people are allowed to cut their hair on Chol HaMoed. And these are all people that had no such opportunity prior to Yom Tiv. For example, someone who came from overseas. We're going to learn details for everyone in the Gemara. But let's go with the presumption that the trip that you made was an obligatory trip. So who asked you to travel? The person had to travel, and they were unable. There was no barber on the ship. They arrived either on Chol HaMoed or they arrived at Yom Tiv, right before Yom Tiv. Number 2, if a person was freed from jail, Umibeis HaShivya. I'm sorry, someone who was not in jail, someone who was taken captive, someone who was kidnapped, who was freed, or someone who left jail. Now hold on, in jail, aren't there barbers in jail? This is very important. So let's read the last Tosfos in the Amud. So Tosfos says either that we're speaking about someone who was in a beis or asurim in a jail in which there was no barbers or the inmates were not allowed to cut their hair, or now this is a very big Tosfos, that since a person in jail is not in the mood of cutting their hair, it's considered that they were unable to take a haircut prior to Yom Tov. That's a very big line, and that can be used for various atatim. In other words, not that you physically couldn't have, you were not in the mental space to take a haircut, and you were freed, now it's Yom Tov, now you didn't have such an opportunity prior, and now back in the Mishnah, the Hamenuda, someone who was put into a ban. Now guys, the sugya of someone who was put into a ban by a Beis Din will really begin on Daf Tez Zayin. It's going to be a fascinating Gemara. There are different violations for which Beis Din at times will put someone in a ban. For example, someone was found guilty on a financial level. So Beis Din says, Reuven, pay Shimon. And he doesn't do so. So one of the tools that Beis Din has to use to force, so to say, to Reuven is to tell him there's a whole system that if you won't make payment up until a certain date, you're going to be put in a ban. Now, obviously, if Reuven tells the Beis Din, I want to pay, ainly Ichanisht, which is such a good claim, I don't have, he won't be banned that quick. I mean, then Beis Din will have to ascertain whether it's true or not. But if a person has the money and they don't listen to Beis Din, there are times that they ban him. Now, there are other reasons to ban a person. There's a people that are very disrespectful. The words, to Talmidei Chachamim. They are also put into a ban. These are not exactly the same. One is more serious, one is less serious. It depends for what. But let's speak about generally that if someone was put into a ban, as we'll see, also like a Mitzvah, Avelus, we'll see. Menuda, Mitzvah, Shir, generally the same rules. They may not take a haircut. If this person was freed, was released from the ban, from the excommunication that Beis Din put on him during Chol HaMoed. While he was Menuda, he was not allowed to take a haircut. He was only released from his ban on Chol HaMoed. Or a person made a vow. I vow that he's not going to take a haircut, and he released himself from this vow on Chol HaMoed, v'hutar. Or a person who's a Nazir who may not take a haircut, and the days of his Nazirus concluded. Again, either Erev Yom Tov, like right Erev, in this case it concluded during Chol HaMoed, or V'hametzoida mitumasi letarasoi, what's the Bach? V'hametzoida ha'oila mitumasi letarasoi. So we know from Bekitzer that when the Metzoida is already undergoing his procedure to become pure, he counts 7 days, and on the 7th day, he again has to shave his hair. What happens if the 7th day falls out on Chol HaMoed? No, it's Erev Yom Tov was within those 7 days in which he may not cut his hair. So since they were unable to do so prior to Yom Tov, we allow them, yes, to take a haircut during Chol HaMoed. Regarding laundering, the same concept. The following people are allowed to launder their clothing on Chol HaMoed. All the cases, a person who came from overseas, or Mebeis HaShivya, a person was captive somewhere and he was released, or he left jail, Daf Yud Daled on the top, or a Menuda, as we'll see that a Menuda also may not launder his clothing. Or right prior to Yom Tov. A person made a vow not to launder clothing. And during Chol HaMoed, he released himself from that vow. And now we're going to learn about certain garments that even though you had the opportunity and you cleaned them before Yom Tov, they are used so often that they constantly need to be cleaned. For example, mitpuchais hayodayim, hand towels, now we have napkins. They had no napkins. So they cleaned all the hand towels. Comes Yom Tov, everyone used the hand towels. So it's not that we didn't clean them before. We laundered them before. They are all soiled again. They are allowed to be cleaned on Chol HaMoed. Or mitpuchais hasaparim. Now there's 2 ways of teaching it. We're going to go with saparim as a barber. Until today, you sit by a barber. They put a certain shawl, they put a certain garment around you to protect your clothing from the hair. Now, so those garments, since the Mishnah already gave exceptions for which you are allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed, so if a barber is giving 2 or 3 people haircuts on Chol HaMoed, beheter, and after they gave a haircut to Reuven, now that, whatever you call that today, I think it's plastic, it feels like, but whatever they would put would be a garment. Now it's dirty with hair from Reuven. What, Shimon has to have Reuven's hair on him? No, he doesn't. That's something that you cleaned it before, but now it got dirty again. You can clean it again. Or mitpachais hasapag. Mitpachais hasapag means that in the bathhouse, same thing also. So you have the towels. Think about our home. You cleaned all the towels before. They are all used. Now they have to be cleaned again. It's anything that you did, everything you could do, but it got nachamal. It needs to be laundered. Or v'hazavim, v'hazavis, v'hanidas, v'hayoldes. These are people that have something physically flowing out of their body, and therefore their garments continuously need to be cleaned. Or v'chol ha'oilen mituma latara. There are certain people that have a status of tuma to the point that they make the garments that they are wearing also tamei, like a person who's tamei meis on a level of an av, and others. So when they become tahor, we're not speaking about laundering to clean it from a physical impurity, but only now they want to also, when people then would go to the mikveh, imagine, they would also put their garments in the mikveh because they want their garments to be tahor. Well, that's also laundering. You are allowed to do it because they only became tahor during Chol HaMoed. Harei elu mutarim, to launder or to toivel their clothing. However, the shar kol adam, both regarding hair cutting and regarding laundering, even though it's l'tzayda chamoyed, asurim, they are not allowed to cut their hair or to launder their garments during Chol HaMoed. That is the opening of Perek Shlishi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nivra dvarim. And now comes the question: why l'tzayda chamoyed? Fragt die Gemara v'shar kol adam mai tam asurim. Now, Chevra, let's not forget that we did learn a concept at the end of the last chapter that one is not allowed to be machaven, one is not allowed to say that even though I have an opportunity to do a certain work, don't delay it for Chol HaMoed. So we already know that concept. Enoch, we learned that there's a penalty. Remember that? Only for the father, not for the children. Here it's much more serious. Says the Gemara Katan. And we are going to make a correlation, and we're going to have this very often to Tainus. It's interesting, regarding other dinim, not related, but we're going back to Masechta Tainus. And we learned over there that both the Kohanim and the Leviim that are serving in their Mishmar week, and the Yisraelim that were designated to stand, Va'anshei Maimad, they were engaged in their service for that week. So the Mishnah writes in Tainus that they, during that week, are not allowed to l'sapir, nor l'chabes. They can't take a haircut, nor can they launder the clothing, but l'kavet Shabbos they could. And B'chlal, since people, generally Friday, were busy buying food and cooking food and baking food, so people who would get ready for Shabbos would really begin on Thursday. So, B'chamishi mutanim epnei kavod Shabbos. But the whole different side sugya regarding taking a haircut on Thursday, whether you could take a haircut, whether you cannot take a haircut, it's interesting. Nails, we don't cut on Thursday. Because nails in the hair, when you cut them, their regrowth becomes apparent on the 3rd day from when you cut them. Because if you cut your nails on Thursday, you can see them coming back on Shabbos. You don't want to do something that gives the appearance that it's starting on Shabbos. So nails, taka, we don't cut, and hair we cut. How can you cut your hair? Because the Kohen Gadol or Melech was mistaper b'chol yoim. And that's, bottom line is, they took a haircut on Thursday. And v'amar Rabba...
So Rabbi, when it says Thursday, it means Thursday and Friday?
Yeah, Thursday and Friday. We learned, if we didn't speak it out on Tainus, it's good to speak it out now. It really means l'kavet Shabbos. But it was normal that people already started to get ready for Shabbos on Thursday. Yes. Now, v'amar Rabba... Yes.
What's the difference in taich between l'saper and l'galea?
Good. Saper means a haircut, to cut, and l'galech means to shave.
Are we not using l'galea in the sense of hair cutting now?
I actually, let's keep our eyes open, a good observation, and there has to be a reason why this or that, but in this context, each one will mean both. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabba Lazar, my Tama, why over there? Why can't the kohen or the maimed person take a haircut or launder during the week? In other words, people then were off their regular work. So it's common for people to want to use their time better, to say, I'm working this week. Next week, anyways, I have to do something which will allow me some more extra free time. So let me delay my haircut, let me delay my laundering for the week that I'm serving in the Mishmar. And what's the problem? The problem is that when this kohen will begin doing the avodah, he's unkempt. So the same thing is over here. We want for a person to enter Yom Tov with a proper haircut. A person without a haircut for 30 days or more is called a menuvel. Someone who's unkempt. It's not seemly. It's not nice. You're not groomed properly. Same thing with garments. We want you to enter Yom Tov with clean garments. So if you would be allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed, sometimes people would have delayed it dafka for Chol HaMoed. Now I know it's already late, but I have to speak out the following. Based on this, comes the Rabbeinu Tam, and he says, so what happens? He's speaking about people who shave or trim their beards. So a haircut, most people, at least in his days, they would take a haircut, they're good for 30 days. And we're going to speak about those 30 days regarding a person who's in mourning for a parent. But the people who halachically, according to those who say that halachically you can trim your beards, or today with a machine, as long as it's not a razor, you take a haircut out of Yom Tov, you did everything right, and now on Chol HaMoed, it would be more comfortable to shave again, or to trim your beard again. And the Rabbeinu Tam holds you are allowed to do that. Because the only reason why you may not do it is because they didn't want for you to delay it and not go into Yom Tov Minuvalim. This person did not go into Yom Tov Minuval. He groomed himself. The Tur argues with the Rabbeinu Tam, and we are machmir like the Tur. But it's good to be aware of that machlokes. Let's go weiter. If a person lost something and they were busy looking for it, so again, they didn't have that much time, do we say even the honest since the person was engaged in something that they did not foresee? So he should be also like someone who came out of jail or someone who came over, he didn't have the time, and therefore this person should be given the heter and should be allowed to haircut and or launder on Chol HaMoed. It's not evident. When a person is released from jail, everyone knows about it. The ikid is to remember this guy was in jail, however we work. But over here, people don't know. So there's like a marasayin or chshash. So Amar Abaya is very much into the loy plug. He will not allow for this to happen. And the example that we are using is a din that we learned in Pesachim. What did we learn in Pesachim? That people wanted to bake their matzahs in a way that's called sodikin. Either the matzah itself was a designed matzah, or there was a design on the matzah. It was some sort of beautified matzah. And they said you can't do that because since from when you mix the water and the flour until when you have it fully baked, today we know we have the 18 minutes. If you're going to start making fancy matzahs, then it might become chametzik before it's baked. Problem is, or the question is, that the bakers in Baisus, they had forms in which they were able to make this beautiful design just like that in an instant. It did not take them time. So we learned in Pesachim, they also are not allowed to do it. That's your classic loy plug. That yoimiru, what are we going to say? That kol asurikin asurin. Anyone who wants to make this design matzah is not allowed to do it. But only sirike baisus mutarim, we can't say that. So therefore, Abai is trying to say that since the rule is, he's telling Rab Zera that you cannot haircut, you cannot launder. I know the Mishnah gave exceptions, but don't add exceptions. Okay. Ulataimeh counters the Gemara against Abaya. A person who only has one shirt. You only have one shirt. This is similar to the Rabbeinu Tam's question regarding cutting a hair that you want to cut again. You only have one shirt. You cleaned your shirt out of Yom Tov, but now Chol HaMoed, it's dirty again. So we, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, we say Muter l'chapse b'choil shel moed. Question is, if you say loy plug, so why don't we challenge that by saying hachiname yoimru kol aserikin asurin, but seriki baisus only they are allowed to do it? So answers the Gemara, it's all about, is it evident that you are an exception? And indeed, answers the Gemara, ha'itman Allah, that Amar Mar Baravashi, that the reason why we allow a person who only has one shirt, to re-clean their shirt, to launder the shirt again on Chol HaMoed, because the belt shows that this person only has one shirt. What's the belt? There's two pshatim, maybe even more. But when people had these long jalabas, Moroccan-looking long shirts, white bekishes, that was their garment. That was it. That's all there was. And the way they kept it closed is there was a belt on it. The belt in most shirts was inserted into two loops, and the belt did not need to be cleaned nothing near as often as the shirts themselves. So people that were not dirt poor, and they were able to have two or more shirts, so whenever they cleaned shirt number one, they would remove the belt, and then they would put it into shirt number two. They didn't have to own two belts. You used your same belt. People who only had one shirt would sew the belt into the shirt. And when they would wash the shirt would be washed with the belt. So when you see a person washing the shirt with the belt, you know, that's a person that only has one shirt. So there's no maras ayin issue, and we don't say loy pluk. Ravashi learned the above topic in a different way. Rab Zera was asking, if the city's barber was the one that lost something, and everyone who got a haircut, Erev Yom Tov, heard from the barber, I'm in a rush because I got to find my lost article. So it's already known by many people that this Uman lost something. Can this Uman give himself a haircut on Chol HaMoed? Even the Umanu Muchach HaMilsa. No, it's here. It's known because he serviced everyone at Yom Tov, and he mistama kvetched to everyone. I got to rush because I got to go look for my whatever I lost. No. It's not as known as the examples given by the Mishnah. When someone comes out of jail, when someone arrives overseas, that's really known. This is not as known, and for that, teku. Okay, Medina Sayam. So we mentioned a person came overseas. It's not so pashit. As we'll see in a moment, if your trip was not a real needed trip, then just because you decided to go on a trip and you came back out of Yom Tov, lav dafka, you're going to have a heter. So says the Gemara, it seems that our Mishnah does not follow the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda, Oimer, Rabbi Medina Sayam, if a person comes from overseas, when on Chol HaMoed or Erev Yom Tov right before Shkiyah, says Rabbi Yehuda, Lo Yigaleya, he may not take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Why? B'pnei sheyatza sheloi b'reshus. Now the word reshus is used in an unusual way. Reshus means authority. Reshus means authority of others. Reshus means that something else compelled me to travel. One example will be Parnasa. But since a person who did not go on an obligatory trip, there was no reshus, there was no force in my trip. I went to a tour, and I ended up coming back on Chol HaMoed. I have no such heter. The fact that our Mishnah did not mention that, the Mishnah did not differentiate, says the Gemara, our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Doesn't matter why you went. Omar Rava goes ahead and he argues with this opening statement of the Gemara, because Rava holds, that's the way we will learn the Gemara, that everyone agrees to the concept of Rabbi Yehuda. So either it means Rabbeinu HaKadosh did not go into details, but you have to limit the law of the Mishnah, or the Braisa that we quoted, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, our Mishnah argues with both opinions. But let's read Rava's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda in the Braisa. Lashoit means a person is going to Rome. We call that not to Rome, to the city Rome. R-O-A-M. He's spaziering. He's going to tour. He's going on a vacation. Divrei hakol asur. Well, just because you came back, who asked you to come back so late? I couldn't do it. The whole trip was not necessary. You're not allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Limizoinus, if a person needed to earn a living, that's limizoinus. Then you needed to make a trip. Divrei hakol mutal. Everyone will agree that it's, even though Rabbi Yehuda says shaloi b'reshus, that's not the meaning shaloi b'reshus. That was b'reshus. You were under a pressure. Loi nechlaku, there is a machlekes in the Braisa, and that is laharvecha. Interesting concept. Laharvecha means, how do you define this? I don't know. Laharvecha means you have mezoinus, but you want to make another few dollars. Gavaldik. You're wealthy, but you're not uber wealthy. That is the question. Mar Medamale. Mad means Rabbi Yehuda considers this a person as if he went lashoit. You didn't need to go. So therefore, you have no heter. Umar and the Chachamim in the Braisa Medamale lechem mezainis. That's the way Rava limits the machloikes of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim in the Braisa. And again, what does that mean for the Mishnah? Again, two ways. But let's go. Says the Gemara Meisvei, we're going to challenge Rava. Rava, I think you didn't understand the pshat correctly because I have another Braisa. And in that other Braisa it says, Omar Rebbe, or Tosefta, Rebbe's Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He writes that Nidin, I agree with the words of Rabbi Yehuda regarding cutting hair is asur. When kishiyatza shaloi bereshus, when someone left voluntarily, there was no pressure for him to leave, and I agree with the Chachamim if a person left bereshus. In other words, it sounds like they do argue everywhere, as the Gemara spells out. Now, what does it mean, shaloi bereshus? Shaloi bereshus means, like we said, there was no pressure for you to travel. Why? Because you're going just to tour, you're going to sightsee. No. But if that's the meaning, and Rebbe says, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda, well, that clearly implies that they argue. Elama, Rebbe paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. But you, Rava, said that if a person left, stopped to tour, I don't care when they came back. Nebuch on the ship, they couldn't take a haircut. Who asked you to go? Didn't you say that they all agree that it's asur? And Rebbe therefore would not say, I rule like Rabbi Yehuda. He rules like everyone. Ela lemezaynos also doesn't work. Because if you left lemezaynos, if that would be the way you will translate shaloi bereshus or bereshus, again, everyone, you, Rava says, everyone agrees that it's mutter. Ela pshita, that the opening line of this brayser where Rebbe says nidin divrei Rabbi Yehuda must be speaking about leharvecha, which is what Rava said. That's the area you already have mezaynos, but you want to have mezaynos b'harchava, but you don't need it. You only want it. Which is taka, very good. So far, so good. Problem is, you won't be able to continue reading the same Tosefta. Elo ema seifa. Rebbe continues by saying that nidin divrei chachamim kishiyatza bereshus. And here again, what's the case of the seifa? If bereshus means the way we understand it, bereshus means you left under pressure. There was something outside of there was something in your circumstances that forced you. Rashus means there was some authority on top of you. If it means you went to get mezainos, again, what do you mean nidin divrei? Not nidin divrei. Rava says that they all agree mutter. It must mean elolah harvecha. So if the case of the Reisha and the case of the Seifa is the same case, so what exactly is Rebbe saying? It doesn't fit. But didn't you just tell me that Rebbe said that I agree with Rabbi Yehuda in the case of harvecha? So does this not refute Rava's interpretation of their machloikas? Answers the Gemara, it does not refute Rava. Rava stands, Hachi Ka'amar. Rava, the Braisa, this Tosefta, is not telling you who Rebbe paskins like. No, this Braisa is telling you how Rebbe understood their machloikas. Actually, mamish like Rava. That nidin divrei Rabbi Yehuda li Rabbanan. Rebbe is saying that the Rabbanan don't even disagree with Rabbi Yehuda if a person left shaloi bereshus, and that means a person left just a tour. There is no. That's exactly what Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying. Not that I paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. He's saying that there isn't even an argument. Because if a person's trip was completely voluntary, then shafilu chachamim loynechleku olav. They only argued if a person left, there was a little amount of pressure. You were not obliged, you had enough money for Yom Tov, but you wanted to make another few dollars. And the same thing is in the safe of this Tosefta. V'nid and divrei Rabbanan Rabbi Yehuda. That what? Kishiyatze bereshus. Rabbi Yehuda also agrees. And Mainino, if a person had no money and they needed to make a business trip, Pasha to have money for Yom Tov, then also Rabbi Yehuda will agree that you are allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed because your trip was a necessary trip. Shafilu Rabbi Yehuda. Actually, according to that, the Tosefta is actually the source of Rebbe's understanding. Atkan. Now, Amar Shmuel. Says Shmuel, Katan hanoiled b'moed. Interesting case. A child is born on Chol HaMoed. We're not speaking about a child who medically must cut his or her hair, but we're speaking about a child that was born with relatively a lot of hair, and Rashi uses the words, and we see that the hair is causing a certain amount of distress, of tsar to the child. However you define that. So says Shmuel that if a child is born b'moyed, mamish like the cases of our Mishnah, that when you did not have an option to do it prior, you can do it on Cholamoyed. Here also, mutter legaleach b'moyed. And we don't add to the cases of the Mishnah, like we were speaking about before, someone who lost an article. So Shmuel says it's included in the cases of the Mishnah. She'ein lo chabeis asurim gadol mizeh. What's based on? The child was in jail. He was in the mother's womb. He only was freed on Cholamoyed. Which implies that only if the baby was born on Cholamoyed. But if the baby was born prior and you had an opportunity to give this baby a haircut and you did not, again, why should the baby pay for the sins of the parents? Because it's only tzar. Tzar, you have to know how to define it. Maybe you can resolve it by putting on a cap. The baby, if the parents, let the parents have to schwitz more, put on a cap every 10 minutes because they had an opportunity. So is the statement of Shmuel, explicit and implicit. Asks the Gemara on Shmuel, Masiv Rav Pinchas, and Rav Pinchas taught the following Braisa. Here is where we go make a crossover. We're starting between the laws of Cholamoyed and the laws of Avelus. It says in the Braisa that Rav Pinchas taught us, Kol Elush Amru Mutter Legaleach B'Moyed. All the people that are allowed to take a haircut during Cholamoyed, Mutter Legaleach B'Mei Avloi. They are also allowed to take a haircut during their mourning. So if a person was traveling and they arrived on Cholamoyed and they became an oval, they can take a haircut. All of the hetedim of haircutting for Cholamoyed is given to a mourner. Now we made this correlation. So now the Gemara says, what does that imply? That whoever is usher to take a giluach, sipur, haircut, shaving on Moyed, will also be prohibited for cutting their hair during their times of mourning. In other words, the Braisa of Rav Pinchas is equating them together. Daf Yudalid Amid Beis. Now we got a problem. Ve'i Amrat Katan is Bei Plukta. We inferred from Shmuel's statement that we make this distinction regarding can you cut the hair of a baby? It depends. If the baby was born on Cholamoyed, you could. If the baby was born prior to Yom Tiv, enough time that you could have theoretically given that baby a little bit of a trim, then you would not be allowed anymore. Let's make that equation for Avelus. If that is true, Nimtseis Avelus Noiheges Bekatan. No. We're building a mountain on a mountain. We're making an equation, and we're presuming that all of the dinim will be alike, even though we never said that explicitly. Well, that would also imply that we would make the same distinction on a minor. Problem is, Bechlal, there's v'hatanya mikaran lekatan, that the reason why if a child, God forbid, is entering a period of avelus, part of that will be a din of kriya. So we rent the garment of a minor, not because there is an obligation on a minor to mourn, not even midrabanan. There's nervous then, since you would like to inspire the onlookers, crying, feeling the tzad of the passing, which is the whole purpose of eulogizing, to make people cry. So when you rent the garments of a minor, the onlookers have agmas nefesh, which is the goal. Other than that, there's no obligation for a minor to mourn. So how do you resolve? Shmuel makes a distinction regarding Hilchos Cholamoyed for a minor, for Chinuch, and the Braisa of Rav Pinchas equates Cholamoyed and Avelus, but this distinction should not be Shayach because ein Avelus Likatan. So indeed, Amar Avashi, hold on. Of course the Braisa is Gavaldik. But Mi Katani, Ha Asurin, did the Braisa say that everything Benegeh Hilchos Cholamoyed will go over to Avelus? No. Dilma yesh mehem asur, veyesh mehem mutar. Because, for example, a minor because of chinuch will be included in the dinam of Cholamoyed, but we don't have hilchas avelus for minors. Says the Gemara. They have another version. Their version is that Amar Shmuel katan mutar legalchay b'moyed, and Fakir Shmuel said loishna noilad b'moyed veloishna noilad meikara. that these restrictions are inapplicable to a minor. So if a minor has tsar, cut his hair, trim his hair, or her hair. Now guys, people shouldn't jump about an upshetanish. People should just know that an upshetanish is something that was introduced many, many, many years later. Could be that great tzaddikim that were open, that were knowledgeable with Pnimius HaTorah also did not cut their hair until 3 years from time immemorial. Could be. But we're going a halacha over here. And could be we're speaking about a girl. Same concept. Right. Omar Rav Pinchas, now that we have the opposite, Shmuel says that by a minor, you can whatever you need to do to a minor. He attempted to bring a proof to Shmuel from the Braisa of Rav Pinchas. That Omar Rav Pinchas, since the Braisa says, the Braisa is making an equation between hair cutting, which is generally prohibited for a mourner. But there are certain hetadim, and those will be the same hetadim that we are given to every Jew during Chol HaMoed. Again, that implies that whoever may not take a haircut on Moed may not take a haircut during one's period of mourning. So now, Faket Tzadaya. So, Amrat Katan Asad, if one would have argued with Shmuel and would have said that even a minor's hair, if it's causing the minor distress, you may not trim it on Chol HaMoed, and you would then pass over the same rule to Avelus. Says Avelus Noiheges Bekatan, which cannot be, because no one will disagree with this. Vitanya Mekaron Lekatan. The only reason why Kriya, ripping the garments, is done by a minor, it's only because of Agmas Nefesh, to evoke or to inspire grief by the onlookers, not because of any type of mourning for a minor. So that's a raya. So Rav Ashi says not a raya. There is an equation, but who says it's regarding all the cases? Mikatani ha asurim dilma yesh mem asur yesh mehem mutar. Very good. Bekitzer, now that we began learning a connection, just to get the flow. When the Mishnah didn't speak about Avelus, so got Chol HaMoed. Now that we brought the Braisa of Rav Pinchas, okay, so now let's speak about mourning. I just want to say like this, that we'll see this clearly in the next daf. Kriya is not connected to the period of Shiva at all. And we'll get to that, because there is Aninus, there is Avelus. Today in Halacha, when you use the term Avelus, it only refers to someone after the burial. Kriya is not done by a novel at all. Kriya is done only before the burial. If you didn't do it before, you do it afterwards. But Kriya used to be done right at the passing, and at a certain period of time, it became the Minhag Yisrael that Kriya is done during the burial. Prior to the burial, during the burial. But anyways, let's come back over here. Says the Gemara, the big statement. Avel einoi noyeg avelusoi beregel. Again, we're putting together this correlation, and perhaps this is the deeper connection between Avelus and Chol HaMoed. An Avel may not practice the laws of Avelus during Yom Tov. Now, first of all, I want you to know that, again, we're learning Gemara. People know the halacha, sadly, so they're not going to get this. They're going to say, what are you talking about? The regel cuts off Avelus. I know. That's Daf Chav Gimel. We're not up to there yet. We're learning Daf Yud Dalet. Here, the question is, we don't know yet that the regel cuts it off. We know that on Shabbos, let me speak out this. On Shabbos, someone who's in Shiva has to mourn, but not Bifaresia. Yom Tov is different. Yom Tov, it's not that you don't mourn in public. But Dvarim Shebetzina, for example, that a person who's in mourning may not have marital relations if they're married, continues on Shabbos. They may not have marital relations. On Yom Tov, Avel Eino Noyeg Avelus Beregel, according to many Rishonim, already Machlokas Rishonim, Bechlal, there are no laws of Avelus on Regel. Why? Because it says V'samachta b'chagecha. And even though Shabbos, we have a concept of oineg, b'divrei Kabbalah, the Karasal Shabbos oineg, the word simcha is not written by Shabbos. And if you want to understand something, many times you understand something by understanding its opposite. So basically, Avelus and Simcha are opposites. And that's the real link of our sugya. So we're commanded v'samachta b'chagecha. It's impossible to experience what the Torah calls simcha if you are then experiencing avelus, mourning. It's opposite sides of the coin. Shabbos is not the opposite of simcha. I'm sorry, avelus is not the opposite of Shabbos. It's different. You can't do it befaresia. But Yom Tiv, simcha, and avelus contradict each other. That's the real link of the whole Perek now. So we're learning Masechtas Moed Katan. It's a Gavaldik. Everything we will learn, let's learn it in a positive. That all of the things that we're going to be learning about, the opposite has to be done on Yom Tov. Because Yom Tov is the opposite of Avelus. Now, the Gemara clarifies further the statement of Rav Ashi. When we are saying that there's no laws of Avelus on Yom Tov, including Chol HaMoed. Again, I'm saying this, there's really a machloikes rishonim, like always, but that's the way we're learning our Gemara. There are two scenarios. There's a scenario of someone who was already in the Shiva, or in the Shloishim. A person is already mourning, and now comes the Yom Tov. So we are saying that you have to interrupt the mourning, because you got to celebrate Yom Tov. Or there can be a person who entered Yom Tov, everyone is alive, and during Yom Tov he became a novel. Either case, this rule stands. And my friends, again, not only does this rule stand, but we're going to continue the sugya on Daf Chav Gimel. It goes beyond this, but we're not there yet. So says the Gemara, if a person was already in mourning, all right, in other words, it was a pre-existing avelus, comes now Yom Tov, Rav Ashi is correct. And in other words, Yom Tov will suspend, as of now, at least suspend. Halachically, it does more than that. But it suspends mourning. Why? Because Asi Asei Derabim, the mitzvah v'samachta b'chagecha is a positive commandment, and it's a positive commandment for all the Jewish people. That's called an Asei of everyone. And that overrides, that supersedes an Asei the Yachid. Asei, here we begin. Sounds from our Gemara that mourning is midoiraisa. Because we're calling this taka a asay, elamat, it's only from the avelim, so it's weaker. That's the top toisvis here. Asay di yachid says toisvis mashma the avelus ikasay midoiraisa. Because if mourning is only midrabanan, as is the opinion of many Rishonim, then the Gemara should have said something even better. And we'll leave it at that. And Tosfos figures out how that's not the case. Tosfos says that really even the regel is also midrabanan, because midoiraisa, the way you celebrate simcha is by having karbanos, and anything beyond that is not a pure biblical application of the samachta b'chagecha. Tosfos just wants to bring us to our awareness, and just like we mentioned, when it comes to Chol HaMoed, right, this whole machloikes rishonim that goes throughout the whole Masechta is the obligation of not working Chol HaMoed, biblical or rabbinical. You have a machloikes here regarding mourning, with many opinions. Aninos lekula alma, this period of mourning before the burial, on the day of the passing, is for sure midoiraisa. Our people,
a Rebbe passes away, and then isn't that law applied to everyone?
It's for everyone for a short amount of time, Kevin. Again, machloikes, not midoiraisa. Not midoiraisa. There's going to be people that hold that for the 7 relatives, avelus is midoiraisa only for one day. There's many opinions as to the level of obligation. So this is one of the places you can tick off. That's one of the sources. You can resolve it, but it's mashma asay. Now, ve'i avelus tahashta, if a person began Yom Tov, and during Yom Tov, God forbid, the person becomes an avel, here also Rav Ashi's statement makes sense. Because if the person would have had to keep the laws of mourning, what would that mean? It would mean that avelus supersedes Yom Tov. How can that happen? Lo yasei asay di yachid, and it should not have the koyach v'dochi asay di rabim. So B'kitzur, Rav Ashi's statement is the premise, is the base for something that we're going to pick up a few daf ahead. There is no avelus on Yom Tov. Next, menuda, like we mentioned, laws of mourning. The laws of a person who was put into a ban, that's called either a nidui or a cherem or a shamta. We're going to be using the words nidui. We're going to learn on daf tezayin a lot more about this. A menuda mau sheyinhoig niduyoy beregel. Will the laws of a nidoy, will they also be superseded by the Yom Tiv or not? Is it similar to Avelus regarding this heter? Amar Rabbi Yosef Tashema. It says in a Braisa, Donin din nefashis, and v'dini makis, and v'dini memamis, that an chol hamoyed, Beis Din could convene to adjudicate both capital cases, cases in which if the party is found guilty, they're going to get flogged. Monetary cases. Now, a nidui, one of the reasons why someone is put on a ban is if he was found guilty in a monetary case and he was told to pay up, and it's not that he's saying, I don't have. He's disregarding the Beis Din. That would be a reason to put someone in a ban. Says the Gemara, V'i loitzayis ladina. Now that we know from a Braisa that on Chol HaMoed you can adjudicate a monetary case. So there's always the possibility that someone will not listen to. And the counter, the tool that Beis Din has will be Misham Tinulei. They would now ban him. They would ban him on Chol HaMoed. So now, in other words, he's trying to prove that if you could put a person in a ban on Chol HaMoed, if a person was already in a ban, then Yom Tov should not supersede it. Right? In other words, if someone is already Mishumas Va'asi, if someone is already in a ban, Mikare, still, if we were to say that the Yom Tov will supersede the ban like it does for Avelos, so what? How would you even be able to lachatchila put a person in a ban on Chol HaMoed? Hashta mishamtina le'anan doesn't work. Is araya? All this is a proof that a pre-existing ban does remain in effect. That's his proof. The proof of Rav Yosef. Amalei Abaya. No. When the Braisa is saying that we can adjudicate a case, maybe it only means la'ayune bidine. It only means to look into it, but not to give a verdict. Not to give a verdict means it's not even possible for a person to be banned on Chol HaMoed for not listening to a verdict if it's not given. And I'll prove to you, L'cha'ira, that this Braisa is not even allowing for a verdict to be given. Because the Iloi Teimahachim, if the Braisa actually means that Beis Din not only could convene, but Beis Din can go until the end. How can that apply when it comes to capital cases? That it's possible for them to find someone guilty and to kill him on Chol HaMoed? That can be. Guys, Mimne B'Simchas Yantiv is not on the guilty party. It's on the judges. The judges, after they give a verdict, that day they have to fast. Fasting goes against Simchas Yantiv. The Tanya Rabbi Kiva Omer, Minayin l'Sanhedrin, Shehorgu Asanefesh, after you execute their ruling, that during that day, she'ein toy amin kol ois hayom, they may not taste any food that day, as it says, and the answer is, it says in Parshas Kedoshim, there is a negative commandment that is applied to so many different applications. That's this pasuk, loy soichlu al hadam, don't eat over the blood. It means many things, including that the judges who found someone guilty in a Sanhedrin, that person was actually executed, that day they may not eat. So he says this Braisa cannot be speaking about following through. Elot must mean when it comes to din nefashis, it's only la'ayune b'dinei. So here also by monetary cases, which would be one of the main reasons why someone might be put on a ban, it only means la'ayune b'dinei. So there is no proof from this Braisa. Counters the Gemara, so Rav Yosef counters to Abaya. No, you're not learning correct pshat, because if you think that a Beis Din is allowed to convene but not follow through all the way with a verdict, that's asur. You're not allowed to delay justice. No, it's not beginning a trial is less problematic. Delaying the beginning of a trial is much less problematic. Once a trial begins, Beis Din has to go through the steps, and if they know what the ruling will be, they have to give it right away. Imkei nimtzeis ma'anes dinoi, delaying justice. You have a kasha, if that will be the case, how can they indeed put someone to death on Chol HaMoed? Will it not mean that they will have to fast? So the Gemara says what they will have to do is, you can delay it a few hours. That also mitzafro ma'ayne bedine. They look at it in the morning. And since and once they know that they're going to find this person guilty, and they know that the death row doesn't exist in Yiddishkeit. Once a person is judged to be put to death, they are taken out of court straight to their punishment. but they have to approximate. Let's say it's going to take them from their verdict until the person being put to death. They know it's going to take, 30 minutes. What they are allowed to do is, they came to a verdict 10 a.m., 2 p.m. They delay it a little bit. Eat. That day they eat. They're not fasting. They give the verdict prior to Shkia. Once Shkia comes, they can eat again. That's how they resolve it. And before they give a verdict, that little delay is okay. They go into their homes, they eat and they drink that day. And bishkia means prior to, but near the times of sunset, and then they kill him. So yes, they follow through on a judgment. So yes, I have a proof. Amalei Abaya, so Abaya challenges Rabbi Yosef, hold on. It says in our Mishnah, one of the examples for people that what? They are allowed to take a haircut because their ban was removed. Now, he understood that every Yom Tov automatically removes a ban. That's how he learned Pshat. It's suspended. So Rava says, no, not that anyone who's in a nidoi, all of the laws are automatically released by the sages for all. No, the word is for him. In other words, our Mishnah is speaking about a case that someone was put in a ban. Again, we're going with Rabbi Yosef. Yom Tov does not supersede a nidoi. The person has to keep the ban. During Chol HaMoed, he paid what he owed. The Azalu Faisila Baldine, and once you fulfilled your obligations, Beis Din removed the ban. So therefore, we are all siding with Rabbi Yosef, how a nidui is more chamur than avelus when it comes to this din of Yom Tov. Next, Mitzoida. It's always going to be Avel, Menuda, Mitzoida. Mitzoida mao sheyanhig tzorati beregel. All of the rules of a Mitzoida that we'll see more in next daf. We know you have to go mechutz lamachne. You're not allowed to cut your hair. That's a Mitzoida. That's muchlat. You have to rent your garments. Is it suspended on Yom Tov? So Amar Abaye Toshima says in a Mishnah, Vahanazir, our Mishnah, or Vahamitzoida, that goes out from his tumah to his taram, he's allowed to launder his clothing, which implies habimei tumasai. Then yes, then he cannot cut his hair. It doesn't suspend it, which is not necessarily true. Maybe the Mishnah should be learned on a level of loimi boy kamer, loimi boy b'mei tumasai deloi noig. Because maybe Yom Tov supersedes all of the laws of Mitzaira, but if a person becomes pure, if the seventh day, the final day, is on Chol HaMoed, maybe we should make a Gzeira. What will be the problem? Because one of the things you have to do on the seventh day, aside of cutting your hair, is bringing karbanos. And there is a fear that now these karbanos are allowed to be brought on Chol HaMoed. They may not be brought on Yom Tov. And for some reason we are afraid that the Kohen might erroneously bring it on Chol HaMoed. There might be a Chilul Yom Tov, and the solution there might be to delay it. Maybe make a Gzeira, not to cut her here, Shamayasha Korban Oisov. So that's why the Mishnah has to say that even in this case, you do. But there's no proof from our Mishnah either way. Let's go another few lines. Amar Rava, another attempted proof for a Mitzoida, whether Yom Tov supersedes or not. It says in a Braisa, in the Parsha of Tzoras, there's an extra word, Ve'hatzorua. Chazal tell us, it comes to teach us that even a Kohen Gadol, if the Kohen Gadol has the signs of leprosy, he's also included in that Parsha. Okay, so, the Kohen Gadol l'chol hashana is just like a Jew on Regel. Look at this equation. Amazing, huh? A Kohen Gadol, like we said, v'samachta b'chagecha, the service, the avodah of a Kohen Gadol makes the Kohen Gadol like every Jew on Yom Tov. Kiregel l'kolei almedami. How do we know that? I'll prove it to you. Because we have a Mishnah that says that even though an oinein, a person who's in this highest level of mourning, on the day of the passing, a Kohen may not offer karbanos. Kohen Gadol is the exception. A Kohen Gadol is allowed to offer a karban even when he's an oinon, even though he still may not eat consecrated meat. Indeed, Shma Mina. So what do we see? So if a Kohen Gadol is like Yom Tov, and the Kohen Gadol, v'hatzoru al Rabbi's Kohen Gadol, is a raya that the Kahuna Gedoyla does not supersede Tzoras. Regel does not supersede Tzoras. is indeed Shema Mino, noyek tzadat regel Shema Mino. So we have an interesting thing. Avelus is pushed aside plus by a yomtiv. A nidui is not. A metzoida is not. Avelus is the most lenient of these three. And that's where we'll leave over here. And God willing, a lot more to be continued.